Good evening, friends. Welcome to this lecture by the Theosophical Society Point Loma. Tonight, we are starting a new series of 4 lectures, and it's about the essence of Universal Brotherhood. And on tonight's program is a subject that appeals to our deepest thoughts and intuitions, called Universal Brotherhood in its utmost depth. In this lecture, we are faced with a question that, in our opinion, is more relevant than ever in this world. It is not easy to assess the extent of the problems, conflicts, and disharmony that exist, but it is certain that all those involved are searching very hard for a way out. The idea of brotherhood often comes to the fore. There has been and continues to be a great deal of talk and discussion about it. But why does all this talk about brotherhood often seem to lead to so little real improvement, so little more humane ways of treating each other? Tonight, we want to show, step by step, what the depth of universal brotherhood is and how we can make it a living force in our lives. The contents of this lecture are seen here. First, what are the deepest depths of universal brotherhood? Then, what are some important conclusions that we can draw from this? Then, what do we mean by the terms universal and brotherhoods? Then, why do many people have little awareness of unity? What impact does this have on humanity? Then, can we recognize the essential unity in ourselves, in the natural laws, and in the outer world? Finally, is universal brotherhood applicable in practice? We base ourselves on theosophy, the universal wisdom in the form in which H.P. Blavatsky, as messenger of the masters of wisdom and compassion, presented them. The basic ideas of theosophy show us the nature of the cosmos and the nature of us humans. And it is precisely the fundamental principles of theosophy that can lead us to the utmost depth of universal brotherhood. That's why we start our tonight's topic by describing these ancient principles to you, to ponder, to take home, and to explore. There are only 3 basic ideas or propositions, but yet they are the pillars on which all other knowledge of theosophy rests. We will go through them, albeit in a shorter, simpler terms than H.P. Blavatsky did in her prologue to the book, The Secret Doctrine. The first pillar of universal wisdom is also the most profound and abstract. Every being, including ourselves, is an integral part of a boundless principle of life. This means that everything is alive. We are not our bodies, but we are a center of life, a focal point of consciousness, which works through a suitable body on earth during each incarnation. And that center of consciousness is an integral part of an all-encompassing unity, just as a drop of water is an integral part of the ocean. This also means that there is a factual, essential connection between all beings. One way to sketch that essential connection between all living things, just as an indication, is to imagine ourselves as a whirlpool in an ocean of life. We are individuals. We think and act on our own based on our free will. We create our own unique whirlpool. But at the same time, we are in all respects parts of that ocean of life from which we derive everything that we are. Or using another symbolical image, every being is like a spark in a fire. There are indeed countless sparks, but they form one whole, and they are in their own way expressions of that same fire. A spark radiates the same light as the whole fire. So we cannot step out of that connectedness. Universal Brotherhood, we say, is therefore a fact, not a wish. Every being influences every other being. We are dependent on each other. We form an unbreakable unity, whether we realize it as humans or not, whether we take it into account or not. It is a fact. Not because we would like it to be, but because of the deepest nature of our being, which is one with all other beings. And it's a great inspiring thought. An image from which you can derive much wisdom throughout your entire life. No, throughout all your lives. The next pillar or fundamental principle is every being carries within itself limitless abilities and gradually develops them. This is a direct consequence of the first fundamental principle. After all, if we are integral parts of an eternal and limitless principle of life, then that limitlessness is also our own deepest core. We carry within us all the powers, all the wisdom and capacities of the entire cosmos. The challenge is to develop those potencies, to activate them, to broaden our vision and increase our knowledge and skills. But there are no limits to our inner growth. But the most important conclusion of this pillar of theosophy for us humans is probably all beings are fundamentally equal. All that is rooted in the same essential source. The same fundamental life streams throughout all beings of whatever level of growth. That's why all entities are essentially equal. But this essential equality has nothing to do with external likeness. Because every being expresses itself differently in the external world. No, equality flows from the deepest essence of the cosmos and is above all such outer differences. Many people intuit equality as something deeply fundamental, as something that should be the starting point for human thought and action if we want to move toward a much more harmonious world. That starts indeed with the recognition of our fellow human beings as completely equal to us. That principle was and is the deepest inspiration for all struggles for emancipation and equal civil rights. It is also the basis of most legal constitutions of the world. And we find it as a starting point in virtually all international human rights treaties. When truly understood, it removes the causes of all forms of discrimination and emphasizes that every person in a country has exactly the same rights and obligations. The third pillar, or of universal wisdom, the third principle, is all inner development is cyclical and based on cooperation. The development of the latent capacities within us, and of course within every being, always takes place in a cyclical manner. Just think of the cycle of being awake and asleep, and the cycle of outer life and the period of death. We always learn through periodic repetition, whereby in each cycle, short or long, we can perfect those capacities a little more. How quickly we develop, or whether we seize our opportunities to learn from events, that is up to us. That is our free choice. Every human being has a fundamental free will and is therefore also responsible for the choices he makes. Furthermore, all cyclical growth is based on cooperation. Our inner development can only take place within the totality of life, within the community of life we call the Milky Way, and within the community of life we call our solar system, or our planet Earth. We humans can only learn in interaction with, in cooperation with our fellow human beings. We cannot do without our fellow human beings. Even a small child understands that. Well, there are countless other examples of this fundamental cooperation. We will now mention one. In each incarnation, we build a body consisting of countless cell beings and atom beings. And as we form our body during the birth process, we draw all these beings to us and start a close collaboration with them. When we reach the end of our life and ready for a period of rest, we let go of our body and all these cell beings go their separate ways, becoming parts of the bodies of other organisms, until we summon them back, as it were, at the beginning of our next life. So, being physically born and living in the outer world is therefore in itself a continuous process of cooperation. These three principles of the universal wisdom we mentioned form one single coherent philosophy in life, and we can draw many important conclusions from them. Perhaps the most important conclusion is Universal Brotherhood is there, whether people recognize it at present or not. Ethics, love for all living things, and awareness of responsibility flow directly from the nature and structure of the cosmos. So, they are not agreements that people can make among themselves based on their best, but always limited, vision at present. What do we mean then when we say that the great challenge is to realize universal brotherhood? Because we just said it is already there. Yes, it is. But to what extent do we realize it? And does it play a role in our lives? Hence, the great challenge is to allow the factual unity in which we live also to live in our own thoughts and feelings, to use it more and more as the source of our inspiration. We can take a step further every day. There is always more compassion and understanding to develop. Another important conclusion from the key thoughts of wisdom is all inner growth comes from within ourselves, driven by our own choices and efforts. This means that, from a theosophical perspective, you will not easily become discouraged if humanity does not take all the inner steps you might want to see realized in a short period of time, in your enthusiasm and idealism, because that is simply not possible. Inner growth can only come through one's own experience and one's own efforts, through one's own choices, and that takes time. We know this all too well from our own experience. But what is important for us all is the question what we ourselves can contribute now to humanity. And therein lie our possibilities. And those possibilities may be greater than we sometimes think. It is very helpful to create for yourself gradually a clearer picture of Universal Brotherhood, because only then we can learn to use it in practice. Our present series of 4 lectures is therefore focused on building up such a clearer picture of unity and brotherhood based on the teachings of Theosophy. We begin first with this linguistic question. When we say Universal Brotherhood, what do we mean by universal? In this context, we mean the boundless universe, the boundless life. Linguistically, the word universal refers to one universe. But each universe is a living part of a larger, even more comprehensive universe, which in turn is a small part of a still larger universe. Astronomy confirms this as far as they can observe with their telescopes. There are clusters of galaxies, which in turn form larger structures. And why should that not continue? Bear in mind that it is always about expressions of consciousness. That's why, by Universal Brotherhood, we mean boundless brotherhood. The term refers to the unlimited life that fills the spaces of space and knows no surrounding fence or wall, no outside, no separation. So, by this boundless life, we do not mean only the physical sphere that we can perceive, but also all other spheres of existence, with their associated beings. This includes realms of existence that are more ethereal or more material than ours, and all beings that inhabit those worlds. Now we come to the second term of the phrase Universal Brotherhood. What do we mean by brotherhood? By this we mean we all originate from the same essence, a principle or foundation that transcends any external form or manifestation. Therefore, we use the word brother in a completely gender-neutral way. We mean every being. And in this case, this difference between linguistically masculine and feminine words has no meaning. This can lead to misunderstandings, especially in our time, but there are simple no words that do not have some connotations in our language. So we work with the terms that we have. And almost everyone knows that when someone talks about, for example, the brotherhood of all peoples, that idea has nothing to do with gender differences of people. The principle of universal brotherhood is very different from a brotherhood created by people. Each human assembly exists only for a certain time, after which that one group falls apart. At this point, we see a great deal of misunderstanding in the world about the true nature of brotherhood. How many people think that brotherhood hardly exists at all at present, and that in order to realize it, you have to unite all people in one organization, perhaps even with one board and worldwide rules. A very unfortunate misunderstanding, because then we place the realization of brotherhood outside ourselves. Then its realization depends on all kinds of external events. And we continue to think and talk about external problems, external goals. And in doing so, we may forget that we all can realize universal brotherhood now, at this very moment. Because what prevents us from seeing every human being, from whatever group he may belong to, as fundamentally our brother? Nothing prevents us to do this. And that is the compassionate attitude. And it is essentially very simple and feasible to love all that lives, without exceptions. The limitlessness of universal brotherhood is a golden key. An interesting example of this can be found in Chinese tradition in the 5th and 4th centuries before Christ. Then there lived a philosopher named Mo Tzu. He developed a very accessible philosophy of life based on the following principle. He demonstrated that all suffering, all problems and frictions arise because people love themselves and their own groups more than they love other men. This attitude is detrimental to everyone, including themselves. After all, he showed, love begets love, and hatred and indifference begets hatred and indifference. That's why Mo Tzu asked his pupils, why should we make any exceptions in our compassionate attitude, if love and compassion are all-encompassing in themselves? We now come to an important question that undoubtedly preoccupies everyone who thinks about brotherhood. Why do many people have little awareness of unity? This question is of enormous significance. It is directly related to the suffering in the world of humans, of animals and plants. Unity, solidarity, these are words that we hear very often. But how great is the influence of these principles on the goals that many people set for themselves? Why does the idea of an essential unity often quickly disappears from view? Ancient Indian philosophy has this following to say about it. The teaching of Maya, due to the imperfections of our thought patterns, we do not see things as they really are. Maya comes from the verb to measure, and something that is measurable always has a limited circumference. In philosophy, the word is used in the sense of limited understanding, and hence illusion. An illusion arises when we do not understand things as they really are. And a good example of illusory thinking is a famous story from a Taoist scripture entitled Li Tzu. It is about a man who cannot find his ex at home. He is searching for a long time, but he cannot find it. But when he spies on his neighbor's son and sees how that son looks and moves, he finds him very suspicious. Everything, all his movements, points to him being the thief. But after some time, the man finds his ex again, on his own property, on some place where he put it himself. And now, when he looks at his neighbor's son, He doesn't look like a thief at all. He is normal, natural. So, our way of thinking determines our interpretation of what we see around us, determines what we experience as a reality. And what we today experience as reality may prove to be an unfortunate illusion tomorrow, when we open our mind to a greater truth. So it is very useful to be aware of this, because then we will constantly try to live with an open mind and, where possible, make our thinking glasses clearer and clearer. This aspect of universal wisdom has a very great moral significance, and which is that if we only attribute reality to the external world, the physical world, then every human being seems to be separate from every other human being. In fact, all things seems to be unrelated and separate from each other. We then live in what Buddhists call the feeling of separateness. It is a feeling because it has no rational basis. In Buddhism, this is seen as the greatest heresy, and by that they do not mean anything accusatory, but that through this feeling of separation, you deny that all beings are one and originate from the same divine source. And the result is that you will be inclined to see your goals and personal well-being as something separate from the goals and well-being of all other people. Then we forget to see the enormous amount of things that we humans all have in common. The simplest truths are often also the deepest. And because they are so simple and obvious, we never stop to think about them. And it's a wondrous paradox. One such simple truth is no human can exist on their own. There is no separation anywhere, and therefore always mutual dependency. There is a connectedness without boundaries. As we already said, a child can understand that. Where does the illusion of separation lead to? It leads to a way of thinking that revolves solely around one's own interests or the interests of the group with which one identifies. Let us cite a small light-hearted example. I remember reading an American comic strip in which a girl wanted to do a good deed. So she founded an association with the abbreviation APES, which stood for Animal Protection with the exception of snakes. She found snakes unsympathetic, scary, and therefore they were not entitled to be protected. This simple joke points to the answer to our question. When we allow ourselves to be guided by our personal preferences, feelings, and egoisms, we bar ourselves to recognize the reality of our essential oneness with all that lives. The focus on only our personal interests prevents us to realize our oneness. The resulting feeling of separation is, as we can daily read in our newspapers, the fertile ground for all kinds of greed and dogmatism, for all our fears, distrust, struggles, and so on. The Mahachohan, a title given to the chief of the Masters of Wisdom, said in a message, the idea of the struggle for existence is the source of most of the misery and all the crimes in the world. Fighting in battles always harm and impair the total community, while sustainable cooperation always gets you further. Then you combine all the knowledge and vision and efforts of all into a strong and fruitful way. Let us take a practical example that we once heard from someone when we were thinking together about how to prevent wars. Suppose, he said, there were a global raw materials bank that ensured the fair distribution of all raw materials around the earth to all nations. What would be gained by this? A sustainable guarantee that every country has its basic provisions. And everyone can understand that this would eliminate a major cause of war, or eliminate all the countries who try to bring other countries under their great sphere of influence or might. You realize that if you help your neighbor now with your raw materials, when that neighbor lacks those materials, you build up a relationship in which you help each other in all respects, through exchange, just like two good neighbors. As a result, both civilizations will flourish. We can see through that feeling of separation. We can see through its illusion. If we see every other human being as also a ray of the divine unity, and see our bonds with them as unbreakable, we will strive to make all our human relationships harmonious, helpful, alert, which also means that you sometimes warn others when someone is about to do foolish things or becomes morally blinded, because that is true friendship. A true friend sometimes says important things that may initially be very unwelcome to that other person. Inspired by this principle of unity, we will not abandon our principles when we ourselves are wronged. Because we know we can only reform this harmony into a harmony if we ourselves sow seeds of reasonableness, compassion, and cooperation based on equality. Only in this way can we break a karmic cycle of disharmony. What is also important here, and we also derive this idea from the message of the Mahachohan, we can learn not to idolize the outer world, not to see it as the only thing that exists. Then we will not seek our main happiness in purely material possessions or experiences. All outer things and outer power will perish sooner or later, whereas we take all our noble thoughts and efforts to our future lives, our selfless ideals, courage, generosity, forgiveness, understanding, patience, justice, daring to stand up for our principles. We all take it to our future lives. And thus, we build a more compassionate and wise humanity through the ages. Our field of work now lies in the physical world. At present, this is our school for the development of our spiritual and moral capacities. So we can see physical things for what they are, tools by which we can realize our principles and ideals. In short, in the terms of the Gospel of John, we can live in the world and yet not be of the world. We now come to the next main question in our lecture. What evidence is there for the essential unity? First of all, it is possible for human beings in a kind of clear flesh to feel absorbed in a total unity, one with the clouds, the forests, the people, everything. Of course, this is not our everyday experience. Yet, at such a rare moment, we can get a taste of unity in a rare flesh, so far as we can receive it. This experience of the deepest background of the cosmos has nothing to do with dreamy or emotional experiences. Your thinking and your senses are crystal clear, and you remember it for the rest of your life. For many people, it has been the beginning of a different outlook and attitude in life, and what they wanted to achieve in it. Furthermore, we will investigate another evidence of the fact of unity, and this lies in the fact that without the assumption of unity, the universal laws become illogical and incomprehensible. And we will pay attention to this important point by mentioning some examples of universal laws. All teachings of theosophy are based on 7 fundamental laws or cosmic processes, which you often name the jewels of wisdom. In the course, the universal wisdom that we give, these 7 wisdoms are examined and discussed by the participants. Those who have already taken this course know about this. We will discuss 3 of them now: karma, inner growth, and reincarnation. Our goal is to show that you can only understand them in their deeper layers from the principle of boundless unity. Only in the light of unity, you may see the essence of karma, inner growth, and reincarnation. To begin with, is the law of karma based on unity? Most of you are probably familiar with the general meaning of karma, the law of cause and effect, whereby every effect is precisely matched to its former cause. Or in other words, what we sow, we shall reap. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. That harvest can be constructive, helpful, and inspiring. It can be neutral, or also disharmonious and a source of suffering. It all depends on the nature of the causes that we laid. This law works infallibly, without privilege or exception. That harvesting will happen sooner or later. Sometimes we only notice the effects of what we have thought or done later on, but the effect will always occur in the future. Keep in mind, however, that we are not talking about the mechanical blind law. Every being has a fundamental amount of free will. How we respond to what happens around us is up to us. That's where our freedom lies. We always decide for ourselves in each situation whether we sow seeds of harmony or disharmony. In this law of karma, indeed, based on the idea of unity, yes, it is, because karma is the law of restoration of harmony. The keynote of the one cosmic life is harmony, compassion. We can consider the one life as a boundless network of life in which every being is a node in the living network. By our actions, we continually are pulling the network in certain directions. Our influence is felt by all other beings. Some will be more influenced by us than others, of course. Yet, everything and everyone is touched. And the totality responds to that action with a reaction that restores the balance. Just like rubber bands that you stretch out and which sooner or later spring back to their original position. Karma is Atman. A master of wisdom once wrote, karma is the principle of unity. If we go against the unity, there will be a reaction. This means not only that karma is the law of restoration of harmony, but also, and this is a very profound thought, our karmas are always intertwined. This is often forgotten nowadays when we hear people talking about karma. If someone has some difficult situation, bystanders sometimes comment, "Oh, that's your karma." Firstly, this is surely not always kind or helpful. But apart from that, there is also a big misunderstanding behind it, namely that we all would have our own karma as a kind of separate package. Whereas, if you think about it, that cannot be the case, because almost every action that someone takes also involves others, directly or indirectly. And the person who said, "That's your karma," forgot something essential. It was also his karma that he now heard about the fate of that person. And that means that he too is involved in the situation and perhaps has a task to perform. Do you see how strongly the destiny of us humans is interwoven in all kinds of ways? In short, there is no my karma separate from your karma. In the deepest sense, there is only karma, unity. Let us continue our investigation of the jewels of wisdom with the question, are inner growth and reincarnation based on unity? Through the chain of cause and effect, we are able to learn and to develop our dormant abilities, becoming wiser and more controlled. And we call this inner growth. It is the unfolding, awakening of our latent, dormant abilities. In the light of the boundlessness, this means every inner step that we or another being take forward is a step forward for the whole. Here we see again the principle of the network of life. A being that takes a step forward has a nobler influence on the entire network, so the whole evolves to a somewhat higher plane. And what we learn in this life, we take with us to our next life in the light of the boundless oneness. And that means there is no end to our cyclical development. Even the, for us, highest conceivable deity learns. Furthermore, our connection with our fellow human beings does not end when we die. We will meet again the people we have influenced in this life, for better or for worse. Bonds we form now will continue to exist in our next lives, and hopefully the relationship will become a little wiser over time. And here the principle of unity comes into play again. We are inextricably linked to each other throughout our cycle of reincarnations. Hence, the old motto of world teachers, are you now encountering conflicts or are difficulties in some relationship? Then start solving it now. Do not put off the problem to the future, because by doing that, you usually make difficult things even more difficult. We cannot step out of the one network of life, so be courageous. Try first to clarify your own understanding and start then to give this relationship a constructive color, taste, based on the idea of equality and universal brotherhood. To summarize, can you understand evolution and reincarnation without the basic idea of unity? No, because all inner growth is expressing unity more and more in our lives. These jewels of wisdom are in fact unthinkable without the key thought of unity. So, the key thought of Universal Brotherhood. And this applies to all jewels of wisdom, and it is very interesting to investigate that further for yourself. Sometimes people may ask us, are there any scientific indications for the unity underlying all external phenomena? Well, we may mention a few. Firstly, everywhere and always we see order, laws in the outer world. The entire scientific endeavor is focused on figuring this out. This fact of omnipresent orderly processes points to a common source. Secondly, the forms of all bodies we see in the outer world are based on only a few fundamental mathematical patterns. As Plato would say, all things derive from the world of ideas, with a central idea, the one goodness. We have written an article about this in our magazine Lucifer. Thirdly, all beings in the cosmos build their bodies from the same types of living building blocks, including chemical atoms. Remember, these are beings. This is in fact common knowledge. Also consider that this is the basis of all cycles in nature. These living building blocks move, as it were, from body to body in all kinds of cyclical movements. Hence the importance of not disrupting the natural cycles on Earth. Another clue, or rather intuition, is physicists are searching for the theory of everything, by which they mean a theory that integrates the four fundamental forces they know into one single model. They call this in their own words, the holy grail of modern physics. But they are still a long way off, and we suspect that the scientists will never discover it really until they start from consciousness as the underlying force. And finally, an example from biology. In recent decades, it has become clear to biologists that when we look to the animal and plant world, cooperation plays a much greater and more fundamental role than competition. This can be called a break with the old neo-Darwinian theories. For instance, all organisms within the ecosystems prove to have a unique role or function to fulfill. In short, all species complement each other and therefore need each other. If we humans cause some species to become extinct, something will always go wrong somewhere in the entire system. But few biologists yet suspect how fundamental this different view is, and one of them is Lane Gorison. She recently made this following statement, which she would like to share with you. The species that survive longest on this planet are not the strongest or the smartest, but the species that contribute to the greater whole. The species that leave this planet better than they found it. We believe there is a great deal of truth in this. It is a thought that we, in our human social life, can also greatly benefit from. We are approaching the end of the lecture and now come to this important question. Is living from the idea of unity feasible, applicable? From all we said, we can conclude yes. We can keep the idea of brotherhood alive in our thoughts and actions every moment and in every group, large or small, allowing it to enlighten our thinking and actions, and overcoming thereby the idea of separateness. What is more valuable and effective for everyone then removing this feeling of separateness, which is the cause of strife and fear and competition. To quote William Quinn Judge, H.P. Blavatsky's successor in the Theosophical Society, we appeal, therefore, to all who wish to raise themselves and their fellow creatures, men and beasts, out of the thoughtless jog-trot of selfish everyday life. It is not thought that utopia can be established in a day, but through the spreading of the idea of universal brotherhood, the truth in all things can be discovered. This, we think, succinctly captures the inner value of universal brotherhood. Okay, friends, this is the lecture. We will have now a pause of 3 minutes, and you can put questions in I think the chat function and the email, questions@blavatskyhouse.org. And then directly thereafter, we will go into your questions, and then we will change to Zoom to the workshop. But first, a pause of 3 minutes, and we see each other then. Hello, everyone. And Erwin, you looked whether there are questions, perhaps?
Not on the YouTube chat, so I suggest we go to the Zoom session for the study.
Perfect. Yeah, surely. Yeah. Now we will start the Zoom session. As Erwin said, you can join, as you saw in the polls, by sending a mail to info@blavatskyhouse.org. And in this study session, we will think further about the implications and the value of what we said. Well, about next week on December 7th, we will continue our series with the lecture Universal Brotherhood, recognizable in all religions and philosophies. And in this lecture, we want to enrich our image of unity with the instructions given by the great world teachers from the several world traditions. And so you are welcome again. And now we conclude, as always, with an appeal to our own spiritual heart. And our own spiritual heart consists of the same essence as the spiritual heart of all other people. And it is already the verse you see from the Rig Veda. O, thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.